We're pleased to be joined on our set here in Milwaukee by Republican Senator from Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg. It's always great to have you.
It's wonderful to be with you.
I would like first to begin with the fact that one of your colleagues on the committee is now the vice presidential nominee in J.D. Vance, the junior senator from Ohio. There's a lot of conversation happening within the business community today, now that he is the pick, a question as to whether or not a J.D. Vance selection is actually an anti-big business selection, given some of the stances he is taking on competition, for example. He has praised Lina Khan at the FTC. He has actually advocated for some regulation around big banks when it comes to executive compensation clawbacks. How should business be looking at Senator Vance?
I think the business community needs to look at the overall ticket and look at the potential of what's going to happen in November. The momentum and the groundswell, and I think JD brings a tremendous amount to this. He's going to help President Trump win in November. And the policies that President Trump will implement, if the business community just looks back to President Trump's prior administration, you think about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the impact on this sclerotic regulatory framework that's in place, this will give us a chance to go back in and make the United States a far more friendly business environment in general. With respect to Senator Vance's particular points of view and perspectives, I'm not going to comment on his behalf on those, and he'll consolidate all of that, I'm certain, with the president's platform going forward. But I do think that, broadly speaking, JD is going to help the president in terms of cementing support here in America. He's going to bring people together that I think it's just an incredibly brilliant pick. You think about President Trump, who has actually been such a great defender of the forgotten men and women here in America. And JD's lived the life that they've experienced. And together, I think they're going to cut across demographic groups. I think it's going to be a massively impactful pick that will help see a change in November that the business community should welcome.
To Kailey's point, though, J.D. Vance's economic priorities include tariffs, a higher minimum wage, and antitrust, which doesn't sound like the economic policies of the grand old party. Is this the new Republican economic platform?
Well, the Republican Party certainly is moving in a way that is embracing the challenges that Americans feel today.
Is it embracing economic populism?
Well, I think that's one way to phrase it. Yeah. But if you think about what Americans are experiencing, we've seen inflation that's really been through the roof. Gasoline prices, food prices up 40%, over 20%, real wages down 4%. When President Trump was in office before, every demographic sector was moving up. They were improving, blue collar better than white collar. So there's a real appetite and hunger to see that sort of success again. And I think that's exactly what you're going to see in terms of the policies that will emerge from the eventual Trump administration.
Do you think that that policy, especially when it comes to things like trade and tariffs that J.D. Vance also has advocated for in addition to Donald Trump, essentially cements that if they were to win in November, tariffs will be higher?
I think tariffs are certainly going to be on the agenda because what we have is a situation right now on a global basis where we do not have reciprocal trade. The term free trade has been misused so many times. And what we have here in America is one of the most open markets in the world if you look at our tariff rates, certainly compared to other nations that are our trading partners. We have countries like China that don't play by the rules at all. And one of the most potent tools to deal with this is tariffs. And I fully expect that I saw it in the previous Trump administration. I worked very closely with Bob Lighthizer and his team because the same team that put the phase 1 tariffs in place on China worked closely with me on the free trade agreement that we negotiated and got executed with Japan. There are real issues there that need to be addressed, so I look forward to seeing it addressed myself.
I have to note that the national debt is not mentioned in the new party platform. When we talk about tariffs, the potential inflationary impact, making the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent, you've seen all the economic reports, and we've even talked about them right here on Bloomberg with you, Senator, that this would add an enormous amount to the federal debt. How do you square this as someone we consider to be a traditional Republican?
Yeah, I have a very optimistic view about this, and I think that a lot of the CBO scoring doesn't take into account the fact that the policies, whether they be tax policies or regulatory policies that encourage capital investment, actually have the effect of growing the economy, and in a dynamic way have the effect of increasing the tax base. We saw this happen after the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was put in place. So I see real potential to grow the economy, and I also say this, and President Trump and I have talked about this on numerous occasions. There are great opportunities to cut spending. What we have in Washington is a huge spending problem. And coming in and taking a very focused and deliberate view toward some of the waste and mismanagement that I see across the board. It's going to be a combination of factors that will be required to begin to get our debt moving in the right direction. But as that begins to happen, I think that we'll see even further economic growth as confidence comes into the system.
I understand the argument that you and many of your colleagues make when it comes to the fact that you could see greater return from the growth that is spurred by tax cuts. Does that mean, though, that no pay-fors are necessary? If we could just get specific about what it is that you would cut in order to offset, or where this will be paid for, other than just this general idea of growth.
Oh, there are plenty of places I think we could cut. Look at some of the programs that were put in place for these multi-trillion-dollar, totally partisan bills that were passed back in 2021 by the Democrats. You think about $80 billion going to the IRS to come and snoop on Americans. There are places we've already started to cut back on that. There are places like that that we can cut immediately, and I think we'll continue to dig in and find opportunities. President Trump will challenge each of his cabinet secretaries and agency heads to find those opportunities. I've lived this at a state level. I was Commerce Secretary of my home state. We cut a tremendous amount of funding out, saved money, found waste and sclerosis, and took it out.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget had a palpitation when they saw this plan and ran the numbers themselves. And the message from Maya McGinnis, who I know you know there, was you can't get to this with $1 billion here, $1 billion there. This will require entitlement reform. You have to get to Medicare and Social Security. J.D. Vance doesn't want to touch Social Security, and Donald Trump has said that he will not either. Do you?
Well, here's what I think people miss. We're talking about mandatory versus discretionary spending. And most of my colleagues and I spend all of our time on discretionary spending. But there's a huge chunk of mandatory spending that has nothing to do with Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. And even more was added to it through the 2021 partisan reconciliation bills. We need to go and take an extremely hard look at these mandatory spending obligations that we have that have nothing to do with people's retirement, their Social Security, their Medicare or Medicaid, and begin to address that. We can make significant headway, again, on both the mandatory side as well as the discretionary side, and still abide by the pledge not to touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security.
I'd also like to ask you about cryptocurrencies, given your role on the banking committee, but also knowing that Senator J.D. Vance is from Ohio, a state in which the chairman of the banking committee, Sherrod Brown, is in a tough re-election fight against a pro-crypto candidate, Bernie Moreno. And I wonder if J.D. Vance entering the race puts crypto more into the actual fore of this election cycle. How do you expect it to play in, not just in the race that could define the next chair or ranking member of the banking committee, but more broadly?
Well, I certainly hope it puts it into play. I think crypto technology is a defining point in this election. If you like centralized control over your financial transactions, that's exactly where Sherrod Brown and the Democrats and this White House administration have been. They have been incredibly hostile toward crypto technology. If you like a decentralized option that allows for more freedom and liberty and also supports some of the greatest technology innovations that I've seen since the development of the internet, I think you're going to be supporting President Trump and J.D. Vance. J.D. has a great deal of experience in Silicon Valley. I think he possesses the great capacity to see this potential here. President Trump and I have spent a significant amount of time talking about the crypto technology industry and the potential that it holds for America. I can tell you, both gentlemen want to see this industry here in America as it evolves. We want to see this innovation happening here because I think it has great potential, great potential. We don't want to see it go offshore. And what we need is a regulatory construct that will allow that, not push it away. And right now, what you have is a choice that would, crush the industry. That's what comes from the SEC right now. That's what comes from, frankly, Democrat members of my own Senate Banking Committee and this administration. We need to move toward the policies that I'm certain we're going to adopt in a Republican administration that will be very favorable toward this industry.
Senator, we have to ask you, of course, about Donald Trump's well-being after what happened last weekend. We were reporting that he was making a lot of phone calls the day after on Sunday. Yeah. And you indicated earlier that you were on the other end of the line on one of those calls. What did you talk about?
Yeah, I talked with him Sunday evening for, 20, 25 minutes. And he was immediately talked about how divine intervention played a role in this. And if you think about how close he came to being assassinated, it's just, I fully appreciate the hand of God that watched for him. But he immediately talked about the father of two, the firefighter that lost his life, leaving a family without a dad, those that were injured on stage there that day. He has very real concern for that. I was with Kid Rock that night, and we got on stage together and really fired up the crowd to go to the GoFundMe site to support those people. their families, and a terrible time for them. President Trump was not surprising to me at all. He's always been that way in terms of his care and concern for others. That was the top of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And then we talked about how things are going to move forward. And I really think that the public is shocked by what happened. I think it shocked us all to our core. And we need resilience, we need strength. And when he came up with his fist raised in the air, mm-hmm. I think that's a picture that's going to be one of the most iconic in the world. America needs a strong leader right now. The world needs a strong leader right now. I speak with world leaders very often, given my role in the Foreign Relations Committee and the fact that I served in the previous administration as a diplomat. There is a great need for a strong America right now, and I think President Trump is moving right into that lane.
All right, Senator Bill Hagerty, the Republican from Tennessee and a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, also former ambassador to Japan under the first Trump administration. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.